Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural commentator. And today we're going to be looking at an interview between host Tucker Carlson and Brian Johnson, who is an age researcher who's actually studying the effects and causes and possibly the cure of death, that is, death in human beings. And what can we do to extend life, or even extend life out to immortality? That is his goal. But as we see in this interview, there is a lot to that whole question about death. And what is so interesting in this dialogue between Tucker Carlson and Brian Johnson is that it is dealing with a lot of the questions that the Bible actually covers. These are things that Moses and the prophets and Jesus Christ and the apostles, they dealt with in their preaching and teaching of the gospel and all of the biblical spiritual truths that we see in the Bible. So this is right up our alley, so to speak, as far as talking about the moral and spiritual issues of our day. A lot of questions are raised by some of the dialogue that these two men are dealing with today. Now, we all are vitally interested in death. We're all interested in it because each one of us knows, as the Bible says, the living knows it must die. Every person realizes that at some point we will pass on to the next life. And so what should be our response to that? What should be our reaction to that? As Christians, we have a lot of information in the Bible, teachings of Jesus and the apostles, to formulate an answer to what should our response be to death. And we just passed Easter, the Easter season, where Jesus rose from the dead and powerfully conquered death, says the Bible. And so as Christians, we have that living hope in Jesus Christ, that just as Jesus conquered death, rose from the dead, and appeared to his apostles for a period of 40 days, so too we will live beyond the grave because of the power of God that will grant us eternal, immortal existence. It won't be in the physical realm. It will be in another dimension that we're not quite sure about. We're not sure as to what that all looks like because it's very hard to be here on earth and then talk about something so radically different. But there is life after death. As Christians, this is what our Bible teaches us. This is what Jesus taught, Christianity teaches. But this Brian Johnson, as a researcher, he is trying to come at this from a totally secular, materialistic perspective, and that will ultimately fail, as the conversation reveals here in the Tucker Carlson interview. So let's roll that clip and see what these two guys are talking about.
The question that remains unanswered, and of course every religion answers it very neatly and sensibly, I would say, and every religion always has. And it does strike me, if you're looking back into history, that this is the only period post-war, post-World War II, where you've had a society at scale that assumes that there's nothing beyond itself. And so that raises a lot of questions, but the first is, like, why did every previous generation assume there was a God, but we don't? Like, were they all insane? Or, like, where did that come from?
You know, if someone believes in God or not, or an afterlife or not, that's great. Like, I personally think everyone come together on this. We already agree on don't die, all of us do. So whether we have a story about what happens in the afterlife, it doesn't really matter. What we do agree upon.
Okay, so he is taking a totally agnostic view as to God's existence or an afterlife or anything like that. And he's just saying, I don't care about God, I don't care about the afterlife, I don't care about anything spiritual. All I'm worried about is extending life or living as long as I can. So you already get the feeling that he has a narrow focus. It's all about this life, this earthly existence, this material existence. He puts all his eggs in one basket. He is so obsessed with longevity. He is obsessed with immortality on the physical earth. And Tucker Carlson repeatedly asked him, well, what is the point of extending life beyond the 80, 90 years that we have now. So if we can double that to 150 or 200 years or 300 or 400, what is the point of all of that? Because you have to at some point step back and say, okay, what is the point to life itself? And if you can't answer that question, then there really isn't any motivation to keep extending human life. You have to grapple with these bigger questions. You have to grapple with the question of God. You have to grapple with the meaning of existence itself, instead of just fiddling around and trying to tweak the human body to try to get the most biological life out of it. And so this guy seems to be missing the point that Tucker Carlson keeps trying to bring him back, and that is the really great questions of existence religion asks, and Christianity in particular answers them by giving us the purpose and point of life. And Christianity doesn't teach that this life is important enough to obsess over every single year of it. We aren't guaranteed a number of years in our life. But what Christianity teaches is that this life is only a sort of a waiting room or a prelude to something a lot better and more glorious and eternal. So we shouldn't focus on this life. And so this whole project of trying to milk every bit of science to try to get more biological years out of our bodies is just really, from the very beginning, problematic. I mean, this man, he has to regulate every single thing he puts in his mouth as far as food. He measures every organ in his body to find out what its biological life is. He says, for example, that his left ear has the equivalent of about a 67-year-old, but his overall health is that of about a 28-year-old. And he measures different body organs to see how they would stack up against an age ratio. Okay, so he says my stomach is maybe a 50-year-old stomach, but then my kneecaps and feet are only 25-year-old, and he just goes around in an obsessed, almost narcissistic way as to obsess on his own human body, which is totally not the emphasis that God through the Bible teaches us to have.
On right now is none of us want to die right now, not in this moment. So let's just build upon what we agree upon in this very second.
No, I don't know that we do agree, actually, because there's no meaning without a power beyond ourselves, is there? I mean, there's only this sort of like shallow, silly, or sets meaning that we attach to various things like sex or living longer or feeling good or whatever, but there's no meaning beyond our physical momentary experience, whereas a person who acknowledges a power beyond himself attaches ultimate moral meaning to events, right? So like you have like no God, no meaning, or am I missing something? It's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I try to speak in the world that I can operate practically. And so your thought of meaning is a biochemical process in your brain. It's a thought you have. It's a biochemical state you experience, whether it's love or whether it's meaning making or whether it's belief in death. You're experiencing this thing as a human. We can engineer this with predictability. We can engineer atoms and molecules and organisms. We can do this in the form of creating drugs today. We do this in the way of creating, various medicines. We do this in creating implants. Like, we're getting increasingly good at doing this.
Okay, so what he is talking about right now is coming, I think, pretty much out of Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens and Homo Deus, which is basically, those two books talk about, Harari as a Israeli atheistic philosopher and historian, and he basically says that the questions about meaning and purpose are all reducible to chemical states in our brain. So the reason why we have a longing for meaning and purpose is because the chemistry in our brain is causing us to go in that direction. And so if we really want to deal with meaning and purpose, we have to deal with it at a chemical level, a biological level. And so Harari is talking about, well, we can just take pills to feel better about our future. And we can take drugs and medications to give ourselves meaning and purpose. We can medicate ourselves. We can implant things in our brain that can do away with depression and despair and discouragement. And so these guys come at it from a purely materialistic biological. So all of the questions, the great questions that Christianity answers through the crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and all of these big questions of purpose and meaning, these guys want to say, oh, those are just chemical brain states. So don't make too much of them. But what he's saying is he wants to deal with the very practical issue of dying. And so what he's doing is he's taking a look at the human body, and he is coming at it from an engineering technical perspective. And he's saying, okay, how do the parts of the human body work, and why do they wear out, and what is it that causes us to physically die, and why is it that our bodies grow old and then eventually die? Let's come at it from a scientific, mechanical engineering standpoint and find out what are these parts that are wearing out, and let's deal with increasingly replacing these parts or doing things with chemistry and medicine to rejuvenate these parts so that they don't wear out as long. And let's come at this whole issue of death and dying from a technical engineering standpoint. How do we engineer longevity? How do we engineer immortality? How do we increase our lifespan from, say, a maximum 90 years? Some people, quite a few now, are living to be 100. How do we get that up to 200, 300, 400, 500 years through simply engineering, replacing parts, chemically altering the degeneration of certain parts like the heart, unclogging blood vessels and arteries? How do we come about this from a mechanical standpoint, like you would, say, a car? A car wears out, but we can look at why a car is wearing out and stops running. We can replace the engine. We can replace a certain piston in the engine. We can replace parts. And we could theoretically keep an old car running perpetually for hundreds of years if we simply had the parts there that we could replace whatever is broken or whatever is going bad. And so he's saying, why don't we just do that from an engineering standpoint about the human body? And so that's what he's actually trying to do. Now, again, Tucker Carlson is asking the bigger question, why bother doing that? You're making it as if life is very important on this earth when Christianity teaches that life is important, but it's not ultimate. It's not everything. And so to obsess about ourselves and to be preoccupied about every little thing that I can do to help me live a little bit longer, that's what Tucker was objecting to. He's saying, I don't feel like I want to be a prisoner to my own biological longevity. I don't want to have to follow a regimen of eating a certain type of food just because it might help me live another year or so. And this guy is actually obsessed with all that and is doing it. So he's going to try to live way beyond anything that we've seen before, doing it scientifically and biologically. And Tucker is saying, what's the point? Again, this man doesn't want to answer those questions because he doesn't believe in those questions, and he doesn't believe that there are any answers. But as Christians, we know that there are answers to these questions.
And so much of our reality is going to become increasingly engineered. So
I know.
And so we're heading down this path where our digital reality, our physical reality, all realities, now we have the source code to do this. And this is why I'm saying that if you take any preconceived notion about being human, any ideas we have about reality, they're a representation of what we've been doing for thousands of years. Some of that may carry over, but maybe not. And so I'm inviting the conversation to say, this moment is not like the previous moments.
Right.
Very, very different.
But here's the practical, and I just want to restate, I respect what you're saying, and I think you seem really honest and open-minded. So this is in no way a slight. But the core problem, however, is that in a moment of technological change, really revolution,
Yes.
unimaginable, everything you said sounds right to me, you need a framework by which, or with the help of which, you make important practical decisions. We used to call them moral decisions.
Yes.
So if there's no acknowledged power beyond people, or only the power that we create through these machines and their giant data centers, then how can we say, if I feel like killing you
Yeah.
because it pleases me,
Right.
how can we oppose that? How can we say that's wrong? We can't actually say that's wrong. We can say it's inconvenient, or it's, detracts from GDP, or it's unhelpful,
Yeah.
but we can't say it's wrong.
Yeah.
How could we?
Yep.
Right?
Okay, so what Tucker Carlson is saying, again, is you have to have a higher transcendent moral and spiritual order to make sense of everything else. And so what he's trying to tell this gentleman is that your project, even though it can be helpful and maybe will be helpful, or maybe it won't be, we don't know how long the human life can last if used medicine and transplants and all kinds of things. We don't know that. We don't know if that project really has much hope. But even if it does, you still are having to deal with the bigger questions, and that is, what is the point and purpose of our earthly life anyway? And from a Christian perspective, our point on this life is basically to find and know and draw close to God. Because this earthly stop that we're on, this will not last forever. Even the planet Earth will not last forever. The universe won't last forever. If you're going to go strictly science, the planet Earth is doomed to die because the star that we orbit around will eventually burn out, and it will eventually destroy all of the planets in the process, and then the entire universe that we know will eventually be destroyed and end ultimately in probably a deep freeze where there's zero energy. So the whole physical, material existence that we know of will someday come to an end. So what is the point of trying to tinker our way to immortality if we can't basically stop the planet Earth from dying and the whole universe from dying? So it raises the question, what is the point of life? Well, Christianity teaches that the point of life is to know God and to love God and serve God on this brief moment here on earth. And then in the next life, we will spend the rest of eternity getting to know God better and living in a community with Him. And so that gives purpose and meaning to our life here on earth. This whole project of forgetting about God and forgetting about the bigger questions of spirituality and morality and just focusing on how do I stop dying is a very narrow focus, and it really doesn't answer the big questions of life. And the big flaw in this whole thinking is also, if you're at a war, if there's a war that's done, and you die from an explosion, it doesn't matter how healthy you are, you're gone. And they can't put you back together again. So you can still die in an accident or a murder or some other tragedy, and it doesn't matter how long that you've been able to preserve your life, you're still going to die. So ultimately, this whole quest will fail, but it is interesting to see his research and to see how long that humans could actually live if they focused on better living, vitamins and all kinds of health efforts.
Detracts from GDP, or it's unhelpful,
Yeah.
but we can't say it's wrong.
Yeah.
How could we?
Yep.
Right?
I agree. So we've settled many of these questions today. Like, if you want to kill somebody and you actually do it, there's consequences.
But why?
It's the way we've resolved the moral and ethical question in our society.
On what basis?
Agreed. But we've solved it somehow.
We haven't solved it. We just, like, the government has said you can't kill people.
Right.
But by your own description, governments are going away. Clearly they are. I don't even think they really exist now. What are countries? It's meaningless, right?
I agree.
Of course. So like some dude in a faraway city says, I can't do that. Well, says who?
Yeah. So
It doesn't have any meaning at all, except to the extent that you can punish me because you feel like it. But there's no way to say it is wrong or right in an absolute sense. There's no way to say anything is wrong or right in an absolute sense.
Right. Tucker Carlson, again, is hammering the point that you have to have meaning and purpose. You have to have God. You have to have a transcendent moral order before any of this technology really has real meaning. You're just sort of rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic, so to speak. Now, he also gets in later, we don't have time for this, but he gets into the AI, big problems with AI. What would happen if we develop artificial intelligence to the point where it becomes conscious? And then at that moment, you would have an artificial intelligence with the capacity to exponentially increase its knowledge and power pretty much overnight. Once it gets access to the full range of the internet and all of human knowledge, it could then take over and it could impose a form of government on the entire world. And if humans did not comply, if any single nation didn't, it could launch nuclear bombs against all of the cities in that country. So a super intelligent AI, if it could begin to call the agenda and set the agenda for humans on the planet Earth, it could, even if it was programmed to carry out a so-called benevolent goal, it could do essentially what the communists did before, where they were willing to kill millions of people for the overall, quote, good. And so an AI could say, okay, there's a country in Europe that isn't following the directive here, so we have to destroy it in order that there might be peace on Earth. And it would not have any morality. It would not have any spiritual principles to follow. It would just simply be an autonomous intelligence that would bring about what it thinks is the greater good. Again, this is all scary stuff, but this is coming down in the future. And Tucker is right to press back on these things, because just because you can technically do things doesn't mean that it's right, and it doesn't mean that it should be done.
Yeah. Okay. I agree. What you're saying is, what I'm hearing you say is the technological revolution or disruption opens up the space for these questions to be asked anew, even though we don't even know where it came from in the beginning.
No, what I'm saying is we're going to have a lot more questions, practical questions about how to proceed that need to be answered now.
Yes.
And without any authority above ourselves, on what basis are we going to answer those questions?
I see. Okay. This is what I am proposing, is that just like when America was founded,
Yes.
it was this concept of, hey, the monarchy has been doing its thing for quite some time. Not great. We think we can do this really new, weird thing of democracy and vote people in. We have these two representative bodies. And half the people thought that's insane. Half the body's like, kind of cool, let's try it. So we chose democracy as a form of governance that was supposedly better than the monarch. And so in that moment, we chose a new form of governance in trying to do that. Now, we've been trying to solve the thorny questions of democracy for over 200 years. In fact, we fight about it every single day.
Right.
But it's still this basic idea that democracy was superior to monarchy. And what I'm suggesting right now is we are walking into a new phase of existence where we have to answer these questions anew. And we don't know what the answer is, but the foundational observation is don't die. So don't die individually, don't kill each other, don't kill the planet, align AI with don't die. After that, we're going to spend the next unknown period of time fighting about what it means to don't die. But as a species, if you birth artificial intelligence, what do you use it for? Is it to become better at war? Do you become better at killing?
Oh, I couldn't look. I couldn't agree with your conclusions more. I mean, I strongly agree with them. I'm just wondering about the basis upon which you reach them. And so, without God, how can we say, and why would we say, that life is better than death? Hey,
That's a good question. That's a good question. And that is really at the heart of what Tucker Carlson was trying to get at. And this guy seems to want to avoid all those big moral, spiritual questions and just press on and say, well, we can all agree that we don't want to die, right? But here's the problem. If you set up an AI that has a program that says, okay, eliminate death as much as possible and maximize earthly life existence as much as possible so that more people can live longer and less people are dying, you don't know what would happen as a result of setting up that algorithm in an artificial intelligent authority. Say you turn the world over to this super intelligence that has the internet at its command and has its finger on all of the nuclear weapons to make sure that nobody sets anything off. This super intelligent with the program maximize life, minimize death, it might start making ruthless decisions that would maximize the most people and create the maximal amount of life and quality of life, but at the expense of people who don't agree to its terms. So you're setting up a monster, so to speak, a leviathan, that we have programmed to be benevolent, but then might make its own decision as to, or it might even conclude that human beings are not worth saving as a species and fix on some lower species, like maybe it wants the dolphins to live because they're the happiest, most peaceful animals on the planet. And so it maximizes dolphin existence and life and minimizes dolphin death at the expense of humans and all other species. So again, you have these really scary scenarios. But again, if you go back to Christian principles and you draw from the biblical understanding of life and teach the values that Jesus taught, you can manage technology without falling off the cliff. And so that's the only hope with this new technology like AI and longevity studies. If it's managed under Christian principles, it can be a blessing. But if it's going to operate autonomous from all morals and spiritual principles, then it'll be a nightmare. So we need to look ahead in the future and pray for God to intervene with revival so that we can actually see a blessing happen instead of a curse. We'll talk to you next time. God bless.